Welcome back to Dragonwings, everyone. As we know, the last time that we read was not a happy one. The San Francisco earthquake hit, and the entire street that Moonshadow and Windrider, Robin, and Miss Whitlaw live on is basically all destroyed. And there are a lot of people who are injured. And Miss Whitlaw, the very confident, brave woman that she is, decides to help and to force other people to help too. So that's where we're going to pick up and see what else happens with this, starting on page 211. The last time that we read, they had taken a break, and Miss Whitlaw had sent one of a neighborhood boy who had survived to go find a doctor. So at the top of page 211, it says, "We had not been at work again for more than a half hour when we heard an indignant yell that carried along the street. It was Robin. 'Hey, you! Drop that!' Father and I turned to see a demon standing on the porch of Miss Whitlaw's house. He cradled a small metal chest in his arms. Father and I were working on a mound next to the house. Father jumped over Miss Whitlaw's fence. I was still climbing over it as Father ran across the garden to the bottom step. The thief stared at Father for a moment. Then the demon tried to kick Father, but Father caught his leg and gave it a vicious twist. The thief had to turn around or lose his leg. Father shoved, and the thief went face down on the porch. He rolled over, his hands reaching for his belt, but Father already had one knee on his throat. The thief lay still. Father slipped the knife out of his belt and threw it into the doorway. He handed the chest of money back to Miss Whitlaw. She took it with a nod of thanks. 'Let him go now, Mr. Lee.' 'But this earthquake will bring out the best and worst in folk.' Miss Whitlaw waved her hand as if the thief were some stray dog. 'Go on.' The thief got up, not quite believing that he was free. Rubbing his throat, he limped down the steps and down the street with everyone staring. 'Better take inside and hide,' Father said. Miss Whitlaw nodded and left. We heard her quick, light steps on the stairs. We both watched the thief slip around the corner, out of sight. 'People,' Father said with a shake of his head. 'And this is probably only the start.' 'Father, there's a whole city in ruins, and more of his kind willing to take advantage of others' misery,' he explained. He touched the club in his belt. 'But there's no helping other people's souls. We can only try to help the people trapped inside the rubble.' About an hour later, we stopped. My throat was dry from the dust and dirt. I went to the outdoor pump and worked at it hard for about 5 minutes, but still no water. And then, turning, I saw an ominous sight. There were 3 tall columns of black smoke rising from the south. They were apart from one another, but as I watched, 2 more sprang up. I went quietly to Father and pulled at his sleeve. He turned, heaved a stone down. He looked in the direction I pointed. 'Yes,' he grunted, 'I noticed them. There's not enough pressure in the pipes for the water to come out of the fire demon's hoses.' 'They'll fix them soon.' 'Not soon enough if there's fires. There won't be any water for the fire demons to use.' He put his hand on my shoulder. 'But don't you tell anyone. No sense of causing a panic. They might get the pipes fixed before there's a serious fire.' And then he went back to work. But it was not more than 5 minutes later that a buggy dashed by. There were a demon and a demoness and 2 frightened demon children clinging to it. To the top of the buggy were lashed a mattress, a nightstand, and other items. Pots and pans had been tied to the sides, and they clanked and rang as the man drove. He had to stop when he came to the hole in the street. His horse was covered with sweat, as if the demon had driven him too hard. The demoness took the reins while he got down and threw his coat over the horse's eyes. He was wearing a bright pink nightshirt underneath. He guided the horse around the hole. Father went down to him then. "What hurry?" he asked. "There's a fire south of Market," the demon said. Market Street was the main street of the city and ran diagonally across it, dividing the city in half. "There's no water for the hoses. They're still going to try to make a stand on Market, but I don't see what they can do. The fire will just spread and spread." Others had stopped work to look at the man. They began to throw down their tools and leave the rubble mounds. Miss Whitlaw stepped to the center of the street and held out her arms. "We still have time," she pleaded. "Please help." But they all ignored her. The demon got back into his buggy and slapped the horse's rump with the reins. The buggy clattered on over the cobblestones. When I looked back, the entire street was abandoned, except for a few people trying to save something from the ruins of their homes. The others had gone to their own places to rescue what they could. Father went over to Miss Whitlaw. "You did your best," he said. "But the people I know hear calling in last hour. No one alive left there," Father said. "Yes," Miss Whitlaw said. "I guess you're right. My God, I hope you're right." The demon boy Miss Whitlaw had sent out came back without a doctor. "They've declared martial law all over the city," he said, wide-eyed with fear. "There's a fire to the southeast, a big one, already across Market." And then he left, hurriedly to join his family across the street, salvaging what they could before they fled for safety, though where they were going to escape the fire, no one knew as of yet. It was not until months later that we learned how it started. The demons would call it the ham and eggs fire. A woman whose house had survived the quake began to make a breakfast of ham and eggs, but the earthquake must have damaged the flue of her chimney, for sparks from the fire caught on the walls, and the whole quarter of wooden houses had gone up in flames. Because the fire companies were off to Market Street, there was no real effort to stop it. It was just spreading. The army came marching in about 4 hours after the earthquake. The soldiers had on broad brim hats, with the crown of the hat shaped into a cone. Over their shoulders they wore blanket rolls in which they had rolled up their belongings so that they looked like they were wearing donuts. On their rifles were bayonets. They were headed by an old demon with V stripes on his sleeves that Father said were sergeant stripes. The old demon was chewing on a plug of tobacco. "You'll have to get out of here, ma'am," he said. "There's a fire coming." "How much time do we have?" "Maybe 6 to 10 hours. "We have injured here." "Take them to Golden Gate Park. They'll be safe there. The fire will be going more north than west." "I don't see how we're going to get there, Sergeant." He seemed to have sized up Miss Whitlaw and liked what he had seen. "Now, I'm supposed to keep a lookout for looters and the like, but if I was someone who needed a horse underneath me, I'd try on Van Ness, where I just saw a horse tied to a wagon." "But surely there's an owner." "Yes'm. He must have gone back to his house for one too many things, 'cause the house fell on top of him while he was getting it." "Thank you, Sergeant," Miss Whitlaw said. "My pleasure, ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat in a kind salute. "Just step lively before the next patrol comes through." The Whitlaws and I spent an anxious 10 minutes while Father went to go get the wagon. He sent We sat down by the front door, clubs in hands, watching for looters. We saw two sleazy individuals, but they took one look at us and slunk on, picking at the rubble as they tried to find something worthwhile to take. It was a relief to hear the rumble of a wagon and the clatter of hooves, and to see Father perched on top of the wagon. We loaded the sick onto the wagon, along with some bedding, some clothes, a frying pan or two, and other things. That, plus Whitlaw's bags and our own boxes of possessions, took up the wagon. The whole southward side of the city was covered with black smoke now. I could not see the sun even. As she climbed into the wagon beside Father, Miss Whitlaw asked him, "Don't you want to throw away your club?" "Not yet." Father looked grim. "I no like what I see. Come back here." He did not elaborate, and we did not ask for details. The streets were strangely empty now. The houses that were standing were tilted every which way, as if they were drunk. Rubble covered the streets. We saw dead horses everywhere, and now and then heard rifle shots. I asked Father what they were, and he replied grimly, "Soldiers shoot looters." Well, we got everyone to Golden Gate Park, where there were thousands of other demons and demonesses and their families. Healthy as well as injured, all had taken refuge there. We got our patients to the demon doctors and found a site for a camp, and the demons, right next to the site, agreed to watch our things. Then we headed back. On her lap, Miss Whitlaw now had an antique pistol, which had once belonged to her father. She had taken it along in one of her bags as a souvenir, but had gotten it out, just in case we met more than Father's club could handle. Lefty was waiting for us on the stoop, munching on a chicken drumstick. Father laughed with relief and jumped off the wagon. "Well, you did all right for yourself." "I might say the same." Lefty looked up at me. "You're both rather filthy, but otherwise intact." "How about the others?" "Equally as filthy and equally as intact. Uncle sent me to check on you." "You can see we'll be all right." "I also came by to get your help," Lefty added. "Uncle won't leave the building." "The old fool," Father muttered. "Will you come?" Lefty asked. "Of course, but let us help our friend first." Lefty got up then. He had been sitting on a silk napkin that must have belonged to one of his customers. He fastidiously wiped his fingers on the napkin and laid it on his right arm, folding it neatly with his left. Then he slipped it into his pants pocket. "Are you hungry? Can't you hear the rumbling in our stomachs?" I thought it was another tremor in the earth. He produced a big basket of chicken, enough to feed a dozen people, and best of all, a big bottle of rice wine. I suddenly realized how thirsty we were. Father beckoned to the Whitlaws. "Come on," he said. "It for all." Father helped Miss Whitlaw down, while Robin just jumped. They stood shyly around the basket on their front porch. "This is Lefty," Father said. "How do you do?" Miss Whitlaw held out her hand. Lefty took it. Robin's eyes grew wide when she saw the stump of his right hand, and I knew I would have some explaining to do later. She does not look very ugly for a demoness," Lefty said to Father. "Most of them do not age well." Miss Whitlaw smiled politely and looked to Father to translate. "He say pleased to meet you," Father said, hiding a smile. As neither Miss Whitlaw nor Lefty understood one another's language, everything went smoothly. As we ate, Father asked questions about the Tang people's town in the low voice we all used after the earthquake. It was as if all of us were afraid of attracting the attention of whatever creatures gods, dragons, or demons, had caused the earthquake. Lefty told us about how a bull had appeared suddenly in the streets of the Tang people. He must have wandered up somehow from the stockyards, but many of the Tang people were convinced he was the bull who was one of the 4 animals who supported the world. The Tang people had surrounded the bull, slapping and shouting, and even cutting at him with knives, trying to drive him back to join his brother animals. Finally, one stupid Tang man had thrown his knife. It had buried itself deep in the bull's side, and the bull, with a low groan, had staggered on until a policeman had shot it. Many of the Tang people had left after that incident, convinced that the world had become unhinged. "They may be right," Father grunted, and went on to tell the story to the Whitlaws. After we finished the meal, we put the rest of Miss Whitlaw's valuables into the wagon. There were her stereopticon, her slides, her world globe, almost all the essentials of life, Miss Whitlaw said, disregarding food, clothes, and bedding. It was Robin who got out the clothes they would need, and blankets, mattresses, and other things. The wagon was quite full when we were finished. Miss Whitlaw arranged a kind of soft nest in the middle of the wagon load. "And now the window," she said. Father helped her ease it out of the window frame. Lefty let out a low whistle when he saw the window. "Surely it is the very jewel of heaven," he said. We did not need to translate that. Miss Whitlaw beamed. We wrapped it carefully in newspaper and then in a second layer of blankets before we put it in the wagon in the little nest. Miss Whitlaw turned then and took the door key out of her purse. Oh, dear. I feel so silly. "Go on, Auntie," Robin said. "Who know? Maybe they will stop fire," Father said, even though he knew they would not. But Miss Whitlaw had been born and raised in that house. "Well, when you put it that way," Miss Whitlaw said. She walked quickly back up the path to her door and locked it. Then she put the key back into her purse. It was the last time she would be able to do that. Her home would be burned down that night. We started to get onto the wagon with her, but Miss Whitlaw told us to get down. "Your kinfolk may need help." "You need help yourself, unloading all this and this," Father said. "I'm sure I'll find some people there to help." "You sure?" Father asked. "Yes, I'm quite sure." "You not know how handle horse." "Who do you think Papa took camping with him?" Miss Whitlaw took up the reins. "Don't you worry about us now." "You sure you be all right?" "We'll meet in the park," Miss Whitlaw said firmly. "See you there," Father said. We watched until we were sure she could control the horse. The route to the park was clear of holes and rubble in the actual street, so it would not be that much of a problem. Robin now had the antique pistol and looked so eager to use it that I was sure she would discourage any would-be thief. We waited until they were out of sight, and then Lefty turned to us. "She seems nice for a demoness." "She is a superior woman," Father said. And that's where we'll stop. We will read chapter 10 tomorrow.